Hey everybody, it's Chris, and today I want to talk about spell assessment. And we're going to get a little bit into the weeds today because sometimes we say there is a spell that is a good spell, or another spell we say is a bad spell. But context does matter, and sometimes there are spells that are good in the hands of some characters and not so good in the hands of other characters. D&D classes can be split into 4 categories. You have full casters, you have full marshals, we usually call them marshals, but they're full marshals. Then we have half casters, and then whatever the hell warlocks are. We call classes like paladin and ranger half casters, but to be more accurate, we could call them half caster, half marshal. I mean, with artificers, it's a bit more complicated as it depends on your subclass. So let's stick with rangers and paladins to simplify the topic. And generally speaking, and yes, there are going to be notable exceptions, which is why I say generally. And I'll be using generally a lot in this video. When I say generally, obvious exceptions. A full spellcaster on their turn in combat casts spells, and a full marshal on their turn takes the attack action to either use a weapon or, if you're a class like the monk, do some fancy jump kicks. And so it would be totally reasonable to think that a half caster, half marshal will spend half their turns casting spells and half their turns taking the attack action. Reasonable, but wrong. Or at least that wouldn't be a good idea, because half caster does not mean they will spend half their turns casting spells. So dispensing with the half the time casting spells, half the time swinging weapons theory, you might then assume that they're half as good at swinging weapons or half as good at casting spells. But that's not the case either. And good thing, because then no matter what you did, you would suck at it. So here's how it actually works. If we take a full marshal, like say a barbarian, we can see they get a base martial kit. It includes weapon proficiencies, armor proficiencies, weapon mastery, and extra attack. And yes, rogues are technically a full marshal that doesn't get extra attack. Just like warlocks and artificers, there are some classes that aren't a complete neat fit here, but essentially that's the base martial kit, and rangers and paladins get it. However, if we look at the other class and subclass features for barbarians, generally we have non-spell or magic features that enhance the base martial kit. There's Rage, Reckless Attack, Brutal Strike, Frenzy, Rage of the Wilds, and so on. If we look at Fighter, they have Action Surge, multiple extra attacks, Indomitable, Combat Superiority, Improved Critical, and so on. Then we have Spellcasters. Again, there is a base Spellcaster kit. They get a spell slot progression chart that looks like this, where the highest level spell they can cast is half their level rounded up. At least that's the case until 19th level, because where's my 10th level spells? But generally speaking, half their level rounded up, and a class spell list. Then, just like full marshals, full casters have class and subclass features that make spellcasting better, whether it's magical secrets, metamagic, arcane recovery, expanded spell lists, wild resurgence, so on. So here is the thing. Half casters do not get the base spellcaster kit. They get the base full martial kit, but not the base full spellcaster kit. Yes, they do get their own spell list, but they get this spell slot progression table instead, which, you guessed it, progresses at half the rate of a full spellcaster. That's where the term half caster comes from. Not that they're half as good at casting spells, because depending on the spell, they might not even be half as good. Or they could be better. It really depends on the spell. And if we look at class features for half casters like paladins or rangers, it's less about mundane features that enhance our martial abilities, like neither class gets anything like Action Surge or Brutal Strike, but instead we get features where we can cast low-level spells without spell slots, whether it's Hunter's Mark, Divine Smite, Find Steed, or make those spells better, like Relentless Hunter or Smite of Protection, Or we get features that might not be spells per day, but feel like spells, like Abjure Foes or Nature's Veil. But if we look at the spells that these classes get, they tend, generally, to be spells that enhance our martial capabilities, whether it's from a damage boost from Divine Smite or Hunter's Mark, or mobility, like from Fine Steed or Longstrider, or secondary attack effects, like from Hail of Thorns or Shining Smite, or hit point recovery. You get it. Basically, instead of mundane features that enhance martial capabilities, they have spells and magical features that enhance martial capabilities. You'll also notice way more of the spells on their lists are bonus action spells. Like, they figure you're going to take the attack action and cast bonus action spells to enhance your martial capabilities. So it ends up being like Action Surge or Uncanny Dodge or Flurry of Blows, except instead of being mundane combat enhancing features, they're using magic. So the general setup for a half caster is a lot like a full martial. It's nothing like a full spellcaster. So all this to clarify that a half caster treats weapon use not all that much differently than a full martial does, but spells, they don't treat spells anything like how a full caster treats spells. So when it comes to spell assessment, you can't always say that a certain spell is good or great because it depends on who is casting it. A great spell for a high-level wizard may be a bad spell for a high-level paladin, for example. So what's a good spell for a paladin or a ranger might be very different than what's a good spell for a druid or a sorcerer. So now that I've set up that claim with my reasoning behind it, I want to prove the claim to wrap up this video. Half casters get 5 levels of spells. So let's look at one spell for each of those 5 levels. That's a good to great spell for a full caster to cast, and kind of trash for a half caster. And since I'm just showing 5 examples, here's some general guidelines you can use to make the same assessments for other spells that have a reputation for being good to great spells. And I am focusing on spells generally that have combat application here because for out-of-combat spells, the water is way more murky. 1, is it going to prevent me from taking the attack action in combat? And if so, how many attack actions? Number 2, how much worse am I at casting this spell than a full caster? And 3, what is the comparable resource expenditure for me versus a full spellcaster to cast this spell? Let's look at 5 examples where they will prevent the attack action at least once, and a half caster wishes they were half as good at casting the spell as a full caster was. And before we get started, just to be clear, I am not saying it's universally bad for a half caster to cast these spells, because sometimes it's just about having the right tool for the right problem. And even poor or mid spells can be good if the situation is perfect for them. But if these spells are good on a full spellcaster, you just can't assess them as good on a half spellcaster when a half spellcaster is worse than half as good at casting them. All right, so let's start with our level 1 example, the command spell. Command is a good first level spell and potentially a great first level spell. Basically, it's going to steal a turn from an enemy and force them to do something foolish with that turn. It doesn't care if the target is immune to the charm condition or even if it understands your language. And the upcasting is fantastic. 1 extra creature per spell slot level. A paladin can get this spell at level 3. As for a full spellcaster, let's look at a cleric. That's 3rd level that can also take this spell. So a 3rd level paladin casts command. It's going to cast it at 1st level because they only have 1st level slots. They have 3 1st level slots, so 3 total levels worth of spell slots. And I'll be talking about that a lot. Total levels of spell slots. 1st level spell is worth 1. 4th level spell is worth 4. Okay, so when I talk about total levels of spell slots, that's what I'm talking about. Casting command takes 1/3 of a 3rd level paladin's spell slot levels. Now, here is the saving grace. At 4th level, a paladin is often going to raise their strength, or if they're playing something like a 2-weapon fighting paladin, maybe their dexterity, and their spell DC doesn't go up. They might raise their charisma, but I'd say more often than not, it's going to be strength or maybe dexterity. But at 3rd level, their spell DC is probably the same as a cleric of the same level. So, let's say we have a 3rd level cleric and they cast command. Well, they can cast it at 2nd level, and you guessed it, that's still 1/3 of their spell slot levels total. Except they target 2 creatures. So right off the bat, twice as good as a paladin. Except, like I mentioned before, full spellcasters have features that enhance spells. So if we want a paladin to be especially good at casting command, I mean, you have no options, right? There's no options to do that. But a cleric, well, they could be, for example, Trickery Domain. So now the cleric has both their original position and the position of their invoked duplicity from which they could cast command. That gives it effectively more range. It gives them the ability to avoid some defenses, like perhaps there's a counterspell that's in range of the duplicity where the spell originated, but not of you. You even have multiple choices for what direction they're going to approach or what direction they're going to flee. So even with an equivalent spell DC, and you know where that's headed, the 3rd level paladin is less than half as good at casting command as a 3rd level cleric. Now, I don't know if I go so far as to say that command is a bad spell for a paladin, because command is very, very good mechanically, but I just could not reasonably say it's not significantly worse in the hands of a paladin than a full caster. Let's move on to 2nd level spells. And Moonbeam. So I have a video devoted to how powerful Moonbeam is in the 2024 rules that I am going to link up above. But your Oath of Ancients or Oath of Watchers Paladin of 5th level will have Moonbeam prepared. So might your 5th level Druid. Moonbeam is basically like a space laser that you fire down, frying your enemies. It hits with radiant damage, and you move it around on your turn over enemies, blasting them all. Or your helpful fighter might use something like the Push Mastery on their weapon to force creatures into it, again, frying them. Base 2d10 radiant damage and a d10 with each spell slot level above 2nd. Of course, your 5th level paladin is casting it at level 2. So with 8 total levels in spell slots at 5th level, this is 1/4 of their total spell slots. 2d10 radiant damage with probably a save DC of 14 for half. And the paladin has to maintain concentration on this spell, with no constitution saving throw proficiency or any kind of enhancement to maintain concentration. So the chance that they're going to hold the spell for the entire combat is not very good. Now, our 5th level Druid, well, let's say they cast it at level 2 as well, because yes, they have 3rd level spell slots, but honestly, if I'm a Druid of 5th level and I have 3rd level spell slots, I probably want to be casting my 3rd level spells with those spell slots. So I'd probably be casting a different spell. So let's say for a Druid, they want to expand fewer resources. So they're going to cast it at level 2 as well. Well, a 2nd level spell represents only 1/8 of their 16 total spell slot levels. Half as much, half the investment. Except it might even be less than half, because the Druid at this level has Wild Resurgence, allowing them to convert unused wild shapes into more spell slots. And honestly, if your Druid hasn't used their wild shape and you're going to take a short rest, you might as well do a Wild Resurgence, because you're going to get that wild shape back. Now, we're already at least twice as good, but let's go further. Our spell DC is likely 15, which means we're also going to do more damage on average with the Moonbeam at the same level. And we have Druid subclasses that complement this kind of spell. Like we might be a Circle of Stars Druid, doing even more radiant damage with an Archer form bonus action. Or Circle of the Sea Druid, doing cold damage. And yes, then pushing enemies into the Moonbeam with that same bonus action. And our concentration, well, pretty much any druid is going to, at 4th level, take Warcaster. So the druid is better there too. And that's the minimum. If we're Stars Druid and we take the dragon form instead of the archer form, we have almost no chance of losing concentration in that fight. So again, the half-caster is less than half as good at casting the same spell. And that's even if we ignore the difference in resources expended, which is twice as much. The druid is still much better at the spell. Let's go on to level 3 and Hypnotic Pattern. Hypnotic Pattern, of course, is an S-tier spell. You probably already know how it works. And yes, it can end combats, and at minimum, it's a turn stealer. A lot of it depends on your DM. Like some DMs, the enemies that fail their save just sit there hypnotized. Other DMs, one creature makes their save, and on their turn, they move up to the next monster, who then moves to the next monster, and the next monster, and the next monster, shaking them all out of it. But even then, you've stolen all of their turns. And your 9th level Redemption Paladin has Hypnotic Pattern. It uses 3 of their 16 total spell slot levels. That's 19% of their spell resources spent. And their DC, probably 15, Wisdom save. And your 9th level Sorcerer might have it. I mean, a lot of them do. They have 36 total levels in spell slots, not counting for Font of Magic. And yes, that is more than twice as many as our Paladin. Hypnotic Pattern represents a measly 8% of their total spell slot levels. This is like a throwaway spell for easy fights. So our Sorcerer is already using less than half the comparable resources. And their DC is probably 17, likely 2 higher than the Paladin. Now, our Paladin in theory could also have a 17. Except the Sorcerer doesn't really have 17. They have 18 because of innate sorcery. So even if our Paladin ignores their attack stat, the Sorcerer is still better. But let's keep going, because our Sorcerer can enhance his spell with meta magic. Maybe it's Careful Spell, so they can place the spell catching more enemies and not worrying about allies. Or Distance Spell to enhance the range. Or Extended Spell to enhance the duration. I've never noticed Hypnotic Pattern running out on duration, but nevertheless. Or a Quicken Spell to cast as a bonus action. Or Subtle Spell to cast without components. Or Heightened Spell to give one target disadvantage on their saving throw if the higher DC wasn't enough. And if it's not already overwhelmingly lopsided, let's consider that a Sorcerer might enhance this even further with their subclass. Like a Clockwork Sorcerer might use Restore Balance to cancel that target's magic resistance on their saving throw. Hypnotic Pattern isn't even a spell that benefits from upcasting, but you might notice the difference between a full spellcaster and a half-caster casting these spells is getting bigger as we go up in level, and it's going to get even bigger. As we get into 4th level spells, Banishment. Now, Banishment is a good spell. I don't know if it's S tier, but I'd say it's A tier. I mean, it takes an enemy out of the fight. It targets a pretty good saving throw with Charisma. There is no repeat saving throw. It has great upcasting. It's a solid spell. And your 13th level Horizon Walker Ranger has it prepared. Of their 23 total levels in spell slots, a 4th level spell represents 17% of those. And of course, they won't be upcasting. And they have no special enhancements. And they probably have a spell save DC of 16. And we haven't covered Wizard yet. So our 13th level Wizard might have it prepared as well. Of their 54 levels in spell slots, casting it at a measly 4th level would be 7% of their spell slots, compared to 17. But let's upcast this one. Tough fight. What did I say the ranger was using? 17%. Okay, our wizard cast it at 7th level. That's only 13%, but that's the best we got. And let's say, for the sake of argument, that we've made a Shillelagh Ranger, so they went all out on Wisdom. They picked up Warcaster. They've done everything they can to enhance their spellcasting. Well, in that case, the DC would be even at 18. So our Ranger targets the enemy, Charisma save, DC 18. Our Wizard targets 4. Count them, 4 enemies. 4 times as many. 4 times as good with a lower comparative resource cost. And again, full casters get features to make their spell casting even better. With Arcane Recovery, this is less than a 13% investment. Furthermore, if we're an Abjurer, just casting this spell gives 14 points to our Arcane Shield. And if we're a Diviner, we might not even have the enemy make a saving throw. Our DC might be irrelevant. We might just force a failure. And that moves us on to 5th level spells. And the spell we're going to talk about is Hold Monster. Now, I'd call this an okay spell, but it's definitely at least okay because an enemy that is paralyzed is royally boned. And our 17th level Vengeance Paladin will have it prepared. And let's go ahead and say by this level, our Paladin has maximized their casting stat. I think that's a safe bet. So it's DC 19. A 5th level spell slot is the Paladin's highest, and their only slot of that level. But a 17th level Paladin has a decent number of spell slots, so 5 levels represents 15% of their 34 total spell slot levels. And our 17th level, what caster haven't I covered yet? Bard. Okay, so Bard. And let's face it, I'm going easy on the Paladin here. I could use Twin Spell if I was a Sorcerer, or Split Enchantment if I was an Enchanter Wizard. But you know what? Bard works. So 76 total spell slot levels. To expand 15% of those, the Bard would need to be able to cast an 11th level spell. Well, they can't cast an 11th level spell, so let's go 8th and about 11%. Because if you were to cast Hold Monster with a 9th level spell slot, when you could just cast a 9th level spell, it would hurt my heart. So, with an 8th level spell, 4 targets. 4 times as good with a lower comparable resource expenditure. There, Bard. And Eloquence could reduce the saving throw of a target. Glamour can activate Beguiling Magic. Valor could use Battle Magic to get a critical hit on that paralyzed enemy. Any Bard could use Inspiration. It's not as flashy as a Sorcerer, but a Bard is still a full caster. And our Paladin is a half caster. So they are worse than 1/4 as good at casting this spell. They wish they were half as good. Now, these spells are examples of spells that are good in the hands of full casters and not nearly as good in the hands of a half caster. I didn't pick them randomly. My goal is not to convince you that every spell is worse in the hands of a half caster, because that's not true. My claim is, when we evaluate a spell, it matters who is casting the spell. So, for a totally not random example, let's say I was evaluating a Paladin subclass and say a certain spell is mediocre for that Paladin. And then someone points out that I made a video talking about how good that same spell is, and that's inconsistent on my part. Well, I'm just saying the context matters. Some spells are just good. Some spells are just bad, but a lot of spells can be good or bad or anywhere in between, and it depends who casts them and in what situation, which is another whole can of worms that I'm not going to touch today. But if you agree with my claim, let me know in the comments, but don't thank me for breaking it down. Thank the viewers who support me on Patreon, allowing me to make videos like this. If you'd be willing to support this content, check out the Patreon link in the video description. Today, I am going to be thanking my mage level supporters. So thank you so much to Mr. Wonderful, Babrak, DMG, John D, Darren Williams, Descarpus9, El Conquistadorito, Phoenix, Atap, John Wayne, Joseph Robideau, Wu Carl Kong, Moxie, Nemo, Paul Suzak, Phantasmagoria Prime, Phil Sokolov, Prometheo NTG, Big Chungus, Robert Riley, Shane and Todd Beyond, Simon Jester, Earshine, The Fantastic Emporium, Tyler Thorstrom, and Wade. And thank you so much for watching the video to the end. For those few of you who are still here, I will be wrapping up Paladin soon and moving on to Druid. And until then, I am going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.